This lecture is on the sensory tunic of the eye called the retina. So we are now discussing the innermost tunic of the eye. So this is the sensory tunic. It is called the retina. And it contains millions of photoreceptors. Now we're getting into the really important stuff. Photoreceptors, then, these are cells, that's a C there. These are cells that react to light hitting them. And this reaction is how we get vision. So it all comes down to this. This is why you have an eye. It is so that these cells sort of have an appropriate place to live where they can respond to light. Photoreceptors far predate eyes. Photoreceptors are just cells that respond to light. That's all they do. They change a little bit when light hits them. This is done by way of some things known as photopigments. What it basically comes down to is what you have known throughout your life. If you have a favorite shirt that you wear outside or this kind of thing, it's this. Colors bleach in the sun. That is the basis of vision. Colors bleach in the sun. What happens with your photopigments is that they bleach particularly quickly. So light hits them and they bleach out. And then they actually can then recover when light stops hitting them. So that is how your vision works. You have these cells, these photoreceptor cells. Photo means light. Receptor means receptor. So a photoreceptor cell is a cell that is sensitive to light. And they are the foundation of your vision, is these little cells in the retina that respond to light. Everything else about the eye is essentially just packaging. You can have photoreceptor cells in single-celled, or not photoreceptor cells, but you can have photopigments in a single-celled organism. And those photopigments will still respond to light, and it will help that organism to, for instance, orient itself towards the sun. You can have lights of all differing degrees of complexity, and they all work in the sense that they all respond to light and help that organism to survive. We have our photoreceptors in our photoreceptor cells. That information then becomes vision after a great deal of processing. So, as I said, just as a general note here, then, the photoreceptors are why we have eyes. Basically, everything else then is just packaging or processing. They tweak the experience. So when light hits a photoreceptor cell, it reacts. And the information about this reaction then spreads to some other cells, ones that are called bipolar neurons. And then, so we have our bipolar neurons, and then after that, the information is passed further then on to cells called ganglion cells. And these are also types of nerve cells. So the ganglion cells then produce what are called action potentials, that is to say, basically nerve signals. The technical term for a nerve signal is an action potential. And the axons, I hope you remember about axons, the axons of the ganglion cells, remember axons where you have, I'm going to draw a motor neuron here, but basically where you have the cell body, remember that, here's the cell body with the nucleus. You may have some dendrites, which are sort of short branched structures like that. And then you're going to have the axon. The axon is a fiber, sometimes long, sometimes short, but the axon then is what carries the nerve signal away from the cell body of the neuron. I hope this is sounding familiar to you. So the axons of the ganglion cells then are on the innermost portion of the retina. What did I just say? All right, we're going to have a couple of pictures here just to remind you about these things. So first, your basic eye. This should be very familiar to you by now. Here we go. So here we have the sclera and the cornea. I hope this is sounding familiar to you now. And then, of course, we also have the vascular tunic. Here's the vascular tunic, right? Here we have the vascular tunic, which does hug the sclera here. And then you have the ciliary body, and you have the iris. This should look familiar now. So what I'm getting at is that then we have the retina. So here we have the retina, doing it in purple. There we are. So that then is the retina, the sensory tunic. This is where you have your photoreceptors. But what I am telling you here is that the axons of these particular cells, the ganglion cells, and remember those are not the only cells there. We have the photoreceptor cells as well. We also have some things called amacrine cells. In any case, the point is the axons are on the innermost portion of the retina. And you may also recall that roughly here is where we have the optic nerve bringing the information away from the eye. But you can perhaps see some problems developing here. So anyway, the axons of the ganglion cells are on the innermost portion of the retina. They then gather. So all these axons, which are on the innermost portion of the retina. In fact, let's do the axons in another color here. So the axons then are going to be in blue. All right, so here we have the axons of the ganglion cells. Here they are. Let's put that in. The axons of the ganglion cells. So there are the axons of the ganglion cells. These then gather, so they all bring their information towards the optic nerve. They gather here then and take their information in there. So the axons of the ganglion cells, let's do this in blue so you really get the idea here. The axons of the ganglion cells, this thing here, then are on the innermost portion of the retina. They then gather along with blood vessels. Oh yeah, let's draw them in as well. You not only have blood vessels in the choroid coat, you also have some blood vessels spread out on the surface of the retina as well. So now we have some blood vessels right there. On the surface, the inner surface, I should say, of the retina. There we are. So the axons of the ganglion cells and the blood vessels then all gather together. So all the blood vessels lying on the inner side, the inner surface of the retina. So all these things gather together then and go through the retina and into the optic nerve, which I have drawn for you here. So all of these different things then wind up shooting through the retina and into the optic nerve there. The optic nerve goes to the brain. And this gathering of axons and blood vessels then produces the optic disc. So what this is saying is that this area right in here where everything gathers together, all these blood vessels, all of these axons gather together and shoot through the retina and the choroid coat and everything here to bring that information and to bring the blood away through the optic nerve. This thing right here. That there then is the optic disc. So there we have the optic disc. The optic disc is also known as the blind spot of the retina. So this then is the portion of the retina in front of the optic nerve. With no photoreceptors. That's why it's blind. There are no photoreceptors in that particular portion of the back of your eye there. Basically, that area is so clogged with all of this other paraphernalia, the ganglia and the blood vessels and so on, that there are no photoreceptors there. So, of course, that doesn't respond to light. So, of course, that's a blind spot. All righty. So let's leave that picture up there for a moment, but I'm going to be drawing another, so it may get a bit crowded here. So let's discuss the pathway of light then. So light starts on the outside. It's coming in from the sun. It's coming in from the lights in your room and so on. And it goes into the eye. So the pathway of light starts on the outside and then it goes through the cornea there. Then it goes through the pupil, which is the hole in the iris there. Then it goes through the aqueous humor, the clear fluid in here. Then it goes through the lens, which as you recall is going to be there. Then it goes through the vitreous humor, the clear gel back here. Then it goes through the axons of the ganglion cells. Then it goes through the ganglion cells. Then it goes through the bipolar cells. You remember them, I hope. And I'm going to say, and some other cells called amacrine and horizontal cells. And only after going through all that other stuff does it finally get to the photoreceptors where you need it to go. So let's take a look at that then. Let's see how that's going to stack up. So let's draw this out a bit bigger. This will still be terribly disproportionate. I'm going to do what I can here to try and clarify things through a diagram. So again, here we have an eyeball. You should be used to this by now. All right, so as usual, you know, we have the fibrous tunic, including the cornea at the front. We have the vascular tunic. You remember this. Ciliary body, iris, right? And down here, we have the optic nerve. All right, so what did I just say? Let's use green for light. So here then is some light coming into your eye. So the light passes through the cornea. Here we are. Passes through the pupil, right? Passes through the aqueous humor, right? It's drawing the lens. Obviously, there's aqueous humor on either side of the iris here, but the point is, here's the lens, right? Passes into the vitreous humor. Here it is. It keeps going. All right, so it's in the vitreous humor. Now things start getting strange. I'm going to vastly overdraw the retina here. just so you can see what is going on. We have gotten all the way to the vitreous humor now, and this is vastly overdrawing the retina, but just to give you the idea. In fact, I'm going to really make this far away from the choroid coat here. But the point is, here you have the axons of the ganglion cells. So let's label them. Those are the axons of the ganglion cells right there. So the light has to get through that. It actually has to kind of beat its way across these gathered axons, these little nerve fibers. So we have the axons of the ganglion cells. Then we have the ganglion cells themselves. I will draw them in here because the axon is only part of a cell. So here then we have the ganglion cells. That is to say, the rest of the ganglion cell. Because they're not just an axon. Then we have the bipolar and so on cells. So I'm going to do all of these now in red. So then we have, as I said, all these other cells. Like so, all right. And then only then, I'm running out of colors here, so at this point, I'm going to just go back to purple here for a moment to show you it's only here, then, that we have the photoreceptors. So the photoreceptors now are all the way down. And at the bottom of the whole sensory tunic is where you finally get the photoreceptors, which means that light, therefore, has to fight its way through all these other layers just to get to the cells that respond to it. It's not a great system. It's what we're stuck with. And then, of course, we have the whole business of the ganglions here with the information, and also some blood vessels that we happen to have on the interior of the retina as well in places. All of these things then shoot through the retina. And what all that means then is that this area here, then where we have the axons and where we have the the axons and the blood vessels, that then is what leads to the presence of the optic disc, that portion of the retina that is so clogged with axons and blood vessels that there's no photoreception there. So as I said, the pathway of the light goes through all of these things before it finally gets to the photoreceptors. I hope this is making sense. Okay, so briefly then we need to talk about the two kinds of photoreceptors. You have two different kinds of photoreceptor cells. There are two kinds, and they are called rods and cones. So the rods then are more light sensitive. So these can see, that is to say, they can respond to light in dimmer light. So these are the cells that you will be using particularly when you're walking around at dusk or at night or this kind of thing. So they are more sensitive to light. They do not provide sharp images. They are located more on the periphery of the retina. So not in the middle of your vision, but more around the outside of where you might see. So you might find more rods, for instance. Well, not there. You would find more rods here. So you might find more rods among the photoreceptors in these areas. So as I said, the rods are more located on the periphery of the retina. So they are therefore very useful for peripheral vision, and they have no color vision. These are not the photoreceptor cells that see color. That is why, if you're looking around in dim light, things tend to look more in black and white. You're using your rods then, and they do not see in color. Then we have cones. And these need, actually I'm going to put this down here. Let's have it all as a list. The cones need bright light. The cones see color. They provide more visual acuity, and they are located more in the center of the retina. So whereas you saw rods more on the outside, I'll draw these. You will see cones, which I will draw as little cones. You're more likely to see cones among the photoreceptors here, nearer the center. So here then are where we have our cones. So that's more where you're likely to see cones. I may have even put these a little bit far out for a proper cone. So you have the cones, as I said, right in kind of the middle of the back of the retina, and the rod's more around the side. And then lateral to the blind spot. And remember the blind spot. That's what the optic disc is also called. So lateral to the blind spot is an oval region called the macula lutea. And this is made up mostly of cones. So the macula lutea is roughly this area in here. This is something that I can't draw into this, but basically the optic nerve is not in the very back. It's a little way off to the side. And so then interior to that and directly behind, directly in the path of where light is most likely to come in, is where you will find the macula lutea. And then in the middle of the macula lutea then is a small pit, so an actual indentation then, called the fovea centralis. So you're going to have a little bit of a pit. Kind of hard to draw it. It's nowhere near that big, but there we have the fovea centralis. So the fovea centralis then contains only cones. And it is the area of your eye then of the very greatest visual acuity, where you can see the most sharply there. And this is in the middle of the back of the retina. Where light is most likely to fall. So although we do have the axons of the ganglion cells and everything else here still causing us problems, We do have this one thing going for us, that in this area where the light is most likely to fall, we have this area of particular visual sensitivity. By sensitivity, in this case, I mean acuity. It's not the most sensitive to light. Remember, we have cones there. But it is the area that gives you the greatest accuracy in vision, right in the very middle of the retina, at the back of your eye, where light is most likely to fall, is where you get the greatest visual acuity. And that is it for this lecture.